The Museo ng Kaalamáng Katutubò welcomes you to the sixth of its 2022 lecture series. Good afternoon. Magandang hapon po sa kanilang lahat. Muscat is delighted to see you again. And to those joining us for the first time, we are very pleased to have you with us. This afternoon is most exciting. John Silva is joining us. Muscat has been favored with his consent for a special lecture on a subject matter of which he is past master, photographs. For many years, John has collected, researched on, written about, curated, and organized exhibitions of old and vintage photographs. He has most graciously shared his personal collection of photographs for a number of exhibitions and publications. He has also been a committed colleague in museum work. Kabalikat is a word I shall describe him with. But more about Mr. Silva later, as he will be more properly introduced by Muscat colleague Raymond Santiago. In the meantime, first a brief introduction of us, the Museo ng Kaalamáng Katutubò or Muscat, especially for those who have just joined us. Muscat is a foundation engaged in museum development, collecting, studying, and safeguarding material culture and cultural education programs, with UNILAB as its main benefactor. I am Corazon Alvina. The Museo ng Kaalamáng Katutubò's mission and vision are about knowledge, ancestral and contemporary. Muscat is committed to rediscovering, recuperating, celebrating, and preserving Philippine inherited and transmitted kaalaman. Sharing knowledge is a good part of Muscat's work. We try to create the opportunities within which the public can discover, acknowledge, understand, and appreciate the many layers of Filipino kaalaman. Features of Philippine tangible and intangible culture are remarkable. Muscat's programs and projects are inspired by these. A keen custodian of tangible culture, Muscat's online presentations, programs, and publications with objects from the collection are conceptualized, mindful of careful research and ethical curatorship, maintaining the integrity of objects within the context particular to the source culture. To ensure correct scholarship, Muscat engages and collaborates with respected academics and acknowledged subject matter experts. There are processes that bring forth the most exquisite textile, the handsomest weapon, astonishing basketry. Muscat probes for the inspiration behind the creation of such culturally significant and aesthetically sound objects. Muscat is sensitive to the physicality and materiality of the objects themselves, to guide the study of processes and technology, and shepherd the conservation strategy for the well-being of the collection. Muscat has also operationalized collections management guidelines for registration and conservation. The bonds between humans and their environment and the balance that must be maintained between them receive the utmost regard from Muscat, as do the aesthetic integrity and creative philosophy, the outstanding skills, and the commitment of our artists. Muscat acknowledges the diwa, spiritual sense and essence in kaalaman. The resolve of the Museo ng Kaalamáng Katutubò is to encourage, inspirit, and invigorate pride, admiration, and affection for Kaalamáng Katutubò, as indeed for and in all things Philippine. As promised, we will listen to a more proper introduction of Mr. John Silva. May I ask Muscat colleague Raymond Santiago to do that. Raymond, please.
Thank you, Ms. Cora, and a pleasant afternoon to our friends. Our speaker is a most qualified resource person for his lifelong passion with local and vintage photographs. He is also a cultural administrator, a writer, a curator, and I am proud to add, collector and bibliophile. Mr. John L. Silva is currently Executive Director of the Ortigas Library Foundation, managing a resource base of 23,000 Filipiniana books and related reference materials. Between 1988 to 2010, he was senior consultant to the National Museo, reporting to the chairman of the board for operations review, outreach, publicity, and fundraising. Between 1996 to 1998, he was executive director of the Jeronimo de los Reyes Jr. or GBR Foundation and Museum, another rich source of rare Filipiniana material. He also worked as associate publisher and advertising director for the US-based Filipinas magazine, director for resource development with Oxfam America, as well as occupied numerous positions overseas in educational institutions and non-government offices. He is engaged as board member in various local cultural organizations: Ballet Philippines, Mangyang Heritage Society, Cinemalaya Foundation, Synergia Foundation, and the Manila Symphony Orchestra. As a writer, he regularly publishes essays, articles, and stories in Philippine Star, The Inquirer, Mabuhay Magazine, and Arts of Asia, to name a few. As curator, he has curated numerous photograph exhibits here and abroad. Incidentally, Ortigas Library is hosting a traveling exhibit of photographs on the Cordilleras from 1900 to 1925. It is currently in Baguio. Muscat is fortunate to have this afternoon as resource person Director Silva of Ortigas Library for our August session entitled The End of the Pose, The Rise and Demise of Studio Photography in the Philippines. Without further ado, I turn over the virtual floor to Sir John.
Hi, thank you, Raymond, for that lengthy introduction, which I had hoped you wouldn't do. I've lived so long, I don't even know who that person is half of the time. So thank you anyway. Good evening, and I am going to give you a talk on something that I had done over 10 years ago, and I have now refined it and modified it because 10 years is a long time. Many things have changed. Many of my own observations and conclusions have changed. And also, I'm beginning to be much more confident on the whole idea that photography, and especially critiquing photographs, is really a subjective thing to do. And I'm no longer afraid of presenting my own opinions and feelings on the matter. And I'll show you a little bit of that as we go through some of these photographs. And it's called The End of the Pose, The Rise and Demise of Philippine Studio Photography. At one time, photo studios were all over the place. And now they're a bit of an anachronism, given technology and just given the changes in the way we think about how we want to photograph ourselves, including selfies. But at one time, everyone or many rushed over to a photo studio to have their picture taken for various reasons, of which I will go into now. Let me start with myself. That's me. At age 2, posed at the Pine Studio right beside Pine's Theater on Session Road in Baguio. And the backdrop, as you can see, is a zigzag road. And I'm holding 2 potatoes, and I'm very upset. I didn't like to wear this bahag. I hated it. And I told my yaya and the photographer so, but they just forced me to do it. So after they took the picture, I threw the potatoes at the photographer and I stalked out and went home and I told Yaya, I want to wear that other costume. And she said, no, you cannot. That's for your sister. No, I want to wear it. 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 I just was so insistent that she finally relented. And the next day, she took a picture of me outside the driveway on where we lived. And there I am in full Grota regalia. And I totally loved it. And my cousin then got to wear the bahag. So this is one instance. I think the very first instance of a transgender issue in Philippine society. Okay, we'll move on. The European photographers that came to Asia came for a variety of reasons. One, they knew that things were very exotic, like John Thompson, when he photographed the imperial court in Beijing. I mean, he couldn't have seen anything like this in Europe. There was a photographer named Baron von Stilfried, although this one it could be attributed to either Stilfried or Kusakabe Kimbe. But it's an incredible photograph of a Japanese woman looking like she's in a storm. And what they did was they scratched the negative so that it looks like rain, the white scratches. And they even had an invisible string holding up a part of her kimono to look like as if it was fluttering in the wind. The umbrella was such an oddity for Europeans. They just couldn't get enough of a Japanese umbrella. And so this beautiful scene was something that he immortalized, either Stilfried or Kimbe. This was taken by Felice Beato, just another show of how they thought of Asia as absolutely exotic and different and strange and weird. And this one was a heavily tattooed man, Japanese man. And also the transportation that they used, the conveyances that they used is very different, certainly, from some of the things they saw in Europe. When they got to the Philippines, there were only a few photographers that ever made it to the Philippines, and mostly were anthropologists who decided they wanted to take pictures of the various tribal groups. So this one is of a bridesmaid in Parang Sulu. Again, another, for the benefit of Europe, was just a very, very different, strange, exotic. The Europeans were absolutely flabbergasted at Filipinos, where they hung out. In most days, they hung out by the river. They bathed by the river. They bathed 3 or 4 or 5 times. That's why they were so immaculately clean, which also why they had such a very fickle nose and didn't like anything that didn't smell right, like that of non-Filipinos going around heavily sweating. Then they also washed their clothes. They hung out. They dipped in the water. They swam in the water. They made love in the water. Anything. We were aquatic animals throughout the day. And so the only time the photographer would come and take pictures was the only place would be the river. And so there were many river scenes, early river scenes for these European photographers. This is a very early photograph of the Tinguanes, 3 Tinguanes women taken by an unknown Frenchman. This is one of my earliest collection. You can see they were quite frightened, maybe a little worried, a little fearful, a little angry. and it's certainly nothing mirthful. And the reason is because they couldn't understand what was this tube that looked like the tube of a gun, now directed at them, the one end pointed at them, attached to a box with a man under a shroud, and telling them to not move for about 2 minutes. And then they just sort of followed. And then after that, they packed up and left without ever showing them what was the photograph or what was this thing that he did. So they were always quizzical. Early photographs of indigenous tribes in our country, they just couldn't figure what it is that was happening to them in front of a camera. And this is how the camera setup looked like. You can see that there was this tube with a box and a shrouded man and an assistant, and then there had to be a tent to be able to prepare the chemicals, to prepare the plates, and then also to develop them. It was just a very hard-working affair for photographers. Dean Worcester, as you can see on the right side, is about to take a picture of a tribesperson. Dean Worcester came in a sort of group that came in 1887 to photograph and document tribal groups. He later became, and he came so many times that he became very knowledgeable of the Philippines, and later became the Ministry of the Interior in the Philippines in the turn of the century during the American colonial period. As you can see, there's a white screen, and they usually put the person to be photographed in front of that screen, facing the camera, or else a side view. And that's how he took pictures of. He took over 5,000 pictures of tribal groups in our country, north and south. But he was also a naughty person, this Dean Worcester. I discovered these photographs in Harvard. And this is a fairly buxomy lady in the mountain tribe, posed in a way that certainly didn't look like a scientific pose. It looked more like a porno pose. And he had several of these things that he had kept on the side, but which I found in a bunch of his papers. And this was the period when everybody and their sons went bananas over Asia and the South Pacific because of all these bare-breasted women in Indonesia and in Tahiti, and of course in the Philippines. And National Geographic made a big deal out of it. So that American and European men just went ape shit over this thing of seeing these bare-breasted women. And I remember one of these people, photographers, saying, "Que papayas, que papayas." And I would say, and I remember that after that, every time I bought papayas, I had to see papayas in a different light because of what he said. But there was a perverted part of a few of these anthropologists in our country. Another picture of somebody, a voyeur, seeing a naked man bathing by a waterfall, captured it, and I guess it was for his own personal use, which I find 100 years later. They didn't like Aborigines too much, and the Aborigines also were totally frightened because they were nomadic, and they just didn't know what this camera was. So this is the sort of pictures that they took of tribal, particularly Aborigines. A favorite of the Europeans and the Americans was this man named Chief Antonio, who was in the St. Louis Exposition of 1904. He was a Bagobo and is richly dressed with all these beautiful beads and all these beaded shirts and the like. And he was very handsome, very rugged. I think many women fell for him like crazy because so many pictures of him were taken. During the day, he would be made to pose in the Bagobo village section, where he would have to take off the headband and let his hair flow to one side, and then the visitors would pass and gawk him, and they'd all say, "Oh my God, what is he? Is he a man? Is he a woman?" Ha 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 ha. So he became a sort of a circus freak, unfortunately, and you can see he was not a very happy man. Here's another picture of him in full regalia, beautiful, with his sword or scabbard half out. Early photograph I have of the, and you can see that the backdrop was still very raw. There was just this banig on the right side. I don't know why the banig wasn't right in the middle. But in any case, there it is. And so there was this waterman carrying this pole with the water, and then a lady looking askance to the side, both looking very unhappy. Early photographs, as I said, they didn't know what was happening. They were told to just not move, and so they had no participation to the photographic process, and therefore was alienated and already was very upset, were very upset. Here's a much more pleasant young boy carrying milk, I think coconut milk maybe, looking at the camera. You can see that the backdrop has now become with flowers and there's even stone, etc., just to feel like he was now in the country. This is a lady holding up a pot with a handle, and again, a very rare sight these days. I remember just 10 years ago, I was up in the north and I saw several women dangling, having these pots on their heads. And I said, "Oh my God, I haven't seen this in a while." And so photography captures things that are no longer being done. Early photographs were those of the merchants in Manila, European merchants mostly. And so you have these very mustached kind of guys, and a man and a woman. They're all looking very severe and serious and lifeless. It was beginning to be that was the culture of the elite, developing elite. There's this sense of like they had to be indifferent. They couldn't be engaging. They looked askance, and they were not happy. This is a portrait photograph, a portrait painting by Juan Luna called Bulaqueña. Juan Luna copied pretty much the paintings of Europe, of portrait paintings. And in the past, I used to say, well, look, she's looking very genteel and very pleasant and reserved and all the kinds of nice things I could think about. But now, years later, I realized I think she was a very repressed woman, a very unhappy woman. She looks it. And they were not free. She was not free. She looked beautiful, but she looked graceful, but I think she would have liked to have lived another way if she had her choice. That's what I was alluding to you earlier, that I'm beginning to reinterpret things when in the past I used to follow the usual interpretation of things. And now I'm just saying, no, I'm sorry, I think she's not a very happy lady. This is a mother and child looking like they must be widowed, because even though this is black and white, I could sense that they were in black. They are in black. She may be mourning. She may be mourning her husband, or maybe her parents, or father, mother, somebody. But these are clearly mourning clothes. Again, beautiful backdrop. A little bit of a couch on the side. Empty backdrop. This is an oil on photo, very early, around 1850, and she is unknown Filipina. Somebody tried to do this addition of color, but no way is it in comparison to the kind of color work that was being done by the Japanese on their black and white photographs. This is a radical photograph. I cannot impress you enough to see this woman reading a book. You know, in those days, first of all, women were not allowed to go to school, and that's why you had the letter of the Malolos women asking Rizal to help them with getting the Spanish authorities to give them a school. The whole sense that women were just meant to get married, have children, and do the house. That was it. The idea that a woman could study, could read, could be her own person, just beyond the pale of the Spanish colonizers. So this is such a radical photograph. I don't know who took this photograph, but it's so beautiful because you could sense from her face that she is enlightened by the book that she is reading. 4 women, weavers. I think they're weavers, or they're tobacco persons, rolling tobacco women. They're all very beautiful, but they're all very lifeless, except the one standing on the right, who manages to really look at the camera and give us a sense that she's alive. The rest are just it was that kind of pose that was supposed to make them sort of outwardly thinking, or maybe not even thinking of anything. This is a recent purchase, although I actually found original photographs of this, which I used in previous exhibitions, but now I have the original, which is the title of this photograph below the photo is called India Chinita Se llama Acleta. And Acleta is, I think, a nickname for Aracleta or Anacleta, which is the name of a woman. And I find this very interesting because she's very half ravishing and half very modest. Her hair is not fully present, but one side of it, you could see strands of it. And then her right hand is sort of tucked in because both hand and hair has sexual suggestions, so she doesn't want to show it too much. But yet, her left hand is very evident, and her left pinky is very, very evident, with a very sharp nail. And to me, I mean, I look at this thousands of times, and I try to find some symbolism. And I'm telling you, of course, a lot of this is subjectively my interpretation, but I'd like to think that somewhere along here, no matter how much she tries to be modest, she's really saying, I am who I am. Aha, this is the photograph that I found. And before I found this photograph in 1985, no one ever saw this photograph, none in the Philippines at all. I found this in 1985 in the Museo de l'Homme in Paris. I had come to take a look at their photo collection, the Philippine photo collection. They said they had none, and I was so outraged. And I said, no, there you had, because you had French archaeologists that came and to the Philippines and collected photographs. They said no, and then so I decided, look, show me your photographs of Tahiti and your French islands in the Pacific. So they did. They showed me they gave me all these boxes and boxes and boxes. And for the next 5-6 days, I was at my desk, given to me, with a window view of the Eiffel Tower. And I was totally upset that here I am doing all this research, and there's the Eiffel Tower, and I'm trying to think about how to get there. So, but there I was, leafing through every photograph of grass skirts, until bingo, usually it has to be on the last day, the last box, I see this photograph. And I said to myself, this is not a grass-skirted lady. So I looked, and sure enough, it says Sangli Filipina, Chinese Filipina. And there she is in the most incredible, sensual, radiant form, her hair flowing down on both sides, looking like she had just taken a bath or it's wet with coconut oil. But whatever it is very sensual. You know, it's that moment when people say, you are bagong ligo, you've just taken a bath, and my God, that brings a lot of sexual signals. She's got no chemise on, which means, my gosh, she's even more revealing than the usual. She has her fan half open, which again, through sexual signaling, means that she's open to being approached. But I don't know whether she could really be approached, because I have a feeling that she was actually a courtesan, a lady of leisure, because I don't know how you could be this beautiful, this open, this daring, and yet be sort of be in somebody's, with a family, with a very severe family. No, I think she was already pretty much on her own. So this is, when I discovered this, I immediately said, when I went back to the Philippines, I said, I distributed it open. It's all ours. So now this photograph is now all over the place, and I'm very happy that it is shared. This is a sort of an antithesis of that one. Both photographs and several others that will follow are attributed to Francisco Van Camp, who had a studio in Escolta. This is a woman who is now totally modest. Her hair is up in a pusod, so that there's no sense of, nobody gets sexually excited about her hair. Both her hands are tucked in her sleeve, again, so that nobody will get so excited about her hands. She's fully clothed. She's looking afar. She has a dainty smile. She's totally sexless, but so it is. Three ladies totally looking at the camera, handkerchiefs in the hand, somewhat looking like they're nervous about things. Fans are closed, which means that they don't want anybody to approach them. They look very severe. They look pursed lips, and they don't feel like they need to be entertained. Photo studios by the 1880s, 1890s started to get very elaborate, lots of plants, and trees brought in with backdrops that were also with rural scenes present. So it really gave a feeling like they were outdoors, but meanwhile they're really indoors. And this is just so that the camera had mastery over photographing a subject, that the right amount of light came into their camera, the right amount of speed, the right amount of everything, so that there would be no problems. There were no automatic cameras like we have nowadays. Three hunters, looking malnourished, but I sort of focus on the plants and the rocks in the background to give a sense of them being in the countryside. A dandy sort of posed, looking not too happy. When the war broke out against Spain, many generals, many military people started to have photo pictures of themselves. One, for posterity. Second, because they all look very charming in their uniforms, and couldn't identify any of them except for the one on the left, which is General Emilio Aguinaldo. This is another situation of a photograph where it would be listed as a brigand or an outlaw or a killer or a murderer and things, but never did it ever present itself as somebody who could possibly be a rebel or a revolutionary. This is the Malolos church being burned during the American War. And you can see there's even a cameraman in the front there with this tripod of a camera photographing the burning of Malolos. Churches during the Spanish period and also the American period were subjected to the wrath of the revolutionaries, because they were the friars were the largest landowners in the country. So many churches were destroyed, statues were amputated, friars were arrested, some were killed. So that is the part that we don't usually hear about, but actually the wrath, the revolution was somewhat inspired by the cruelty and also the richness of the friars. The Filipino-American War was a very bloody war. Three-fourths of the American army came eventually to the Philippines to crush this revolt. And they say that there were over 500,000 to maybe 1 million civilians and fighters killed in this war. When the war settled and the new colonizers came in, they of course went to the photo studios and had their pictures taken. And you can see the backdrops are now much more well done, and it all looks very great. And I love that rattan chair on the left side. The elite in the Philippines, some decided to stick it out with the revolutionaries, but many more decided, look, let's move on. I don't want my property to be destroyed. I don't want my hacienda to be burnt. I don't want my wealth to be bothered. So let's just embrace and welcome the Americanos, and let's have a good life. So these are some of the pictures of the wealthy families. One of the first contributions of the American colonial period was the education system. And so the first 10 years or so, you see these pictures of graduating students from, this one is from high school, and you can tell because the one seated is holding his diploma. They're quite proud of their graduation, and this was going to be the next generation of civil participants to the country. I've noticed that gay men, homosexuals, took advantage of photography from the very beginning. I have many photographs of them looking like this, having their pictures taken, looking really gorgeous. And they knew that this was, the camera was going to give them that incredible sense of confidence and beauty. And so they decided to be the first to use photography to have their pictures taken. These two guys just went up to Antipolo in May of 1921. They went to the church to get their blessings for having done the pilgrimage. They went to the waterfalls as shown in the background. That's of course the backdrop, and they had their picture taken as a memento. So picture taking as memento started to happen. This is very poignant in a photo studio setting. The background is that of the lighthouse in Manila Bay. The lighthouse is where small ships go into Pasig River and go out of the Pasig River to load passengers and disembark passengers. And these are photographs of men who, either one of them or two of them or all of them, are planning on leaving for the United States or for points elsewhere. By 1930, over 120,000 Filipinos would now be working in the fields of California, in the sugarcane fields of Hawaii, and as domestics in the East Coast, and in the Navy. And these three are sort of want to memorialize or remember themselves before they leave. Same with this. This you can see the lighthouse in the background, and there is a dedication in the back of this photograph where one tells the other, "Do not forget me. I will follow you soon, and take care." I find this a surreal photo from a studio in Manila. I've never seen this before. It's almost like Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. The man is seated in a chair, but since they wanted to make sure that it has that surreal feeling, they even covered the chair with what looks like boulders and rocks. The man standing leans with his arm on his shoulder, which is a sign of affection. Filipinos were never super affectionate in the display, but there were always sort of like signals of affection, and one of them is just being this kind of closeness and certain touch. This one is even more loving, an arm on the one shoulder, and then an arm and holding another arm. That other arm is holding onto his thigh, and very much close together. So it's a real friendly photograph. Oh, but this one is the most outrageous. Oh, outrageous. This man, his name is Fernando Flores. And in 1912, which is what, 110 years? Yeah, 110 years ago, writes this message to his friend. He says, "Para palaspas." Palaspas here is a coded term for somebody who likes to beat things. beat and beating like masturbation beat. And so it's in quotes to his masturbatory friend, and it's who is erotic and suave and all sorts of things, good things, and he is presenting this photograph as a sign of his admiration. Fernando Flores in December 2, 1912. It's scandalous, an absolutely scandalous photograph, but there it is. Managed to find it. In the teens, 19 teens, everybody was into sitting or leaning against the crescent moon. It meant romance. It meant love. It meant sweetness. So you saw a lot of these photographs of Filipinas and Filipinos somehow draped or over a crescent moon. This is a young man posed by his table. What I liked about this when I first got this was actually looking down on his foot, his left foot, and you can see his chinelas is dangling. And what it does is it's an interesting feeling because when you see that, you feel like there's a tension, almost movement that eventually or soon or something, that chinelas is going to fall. And he has a lovely barong. This is taken by a Japanese photographer who owned a studio in Dumaguete. In the back, you can see Silliman College. And what I found interesting is that he sort of went back and so that it could reveal all the other parts of what was really the backdrop. I mean, what you should have done if you really wanted to just get a scene of the real thing, it would have been just cutting out the backdrop, the sides of the backdrop. But no, he made it look like, I said, maybe this was just a test shot, and he was going to go for the real shot after this test shot. But Japanese studios were all over the country, all over the photo studio, many photo studios. With the introduction of the Kodak camera in the turn of the century, this revolutionized everything. You buy a camera, it comes with 100 photographs or ready for 100 photographs. You take photographs, you send it back to the camera shop. They will develop the photos for you and then send you back the camera with another round of 100 pictures. And this created freedom from the studio, from the photo studio. And this had implications on the way, from then on, pictures were taken. This was a Kodak camera. Later on, it was called the Kodak Brownie camera. I had one of those. You can see it gave permission. It allowed women to be relaxed in this sort of pose, no longer slave to being still in the photo studio. It was so much more warmer. If there was anything still in the photo studio that was being used now, was having all these beautiful women come in to have their picture taken. It was sort of a thing because there was a Manila Carnival in those days, which started in the 19-teens all the way to 1930s, and every year all the provinces vied for Carnival Queen, and so the women came to have their pictures taken, and that's what the photo studio started to excel in. This I just find so ravishing. Just always this stripy. I'm a stripy person, so I love all this stripy blouse, just all the way to the bottom, on sort of ladling touching the ground there. But what I find interesting is this woman on the right. She's now looking straight at the camera, looking very sensual, showing off a flower. And she's aware and very conscious and not afraid and very out there. She's just really saying, hey, I'm beautiful. I'm me. And it has such incredible bearing than in the past of many sheltered women and quiet and totally not lifeless. She just exudes this charm that she's to be taken seriously. The woman on the left is a little bit shy and coy and everything else, but not the right. Same with this woman, even though she looks like she's about to cry. Is a mestiza woman who now has an interesting pose. I like the way she's posed looking at the camera. I like the way she handles her fan on the right-hand side downwards. And yet, on the left is very interesting, how she grasps almost like a man at the edge of a table to settle herself, ready herself. But it feels like she's a certain sense of defiance, a certain sense of exhibiting strength. This is a Sun Studio photograph. Sun Studio is owned by Japanese and was the major purveyor of photographs for beauty queens then. This one is of Miss Luzon, Alicia de Santos, for the beauty contest in the 1921 Manila Carnival. Very pretty. And now I have a theory that some of these Sun Studio photographs started to imbue and direct women to photograph in the Japanese way or in the Japanese pose, like this sort of half turn, like in this case. As you can see, it almost feels like a geisha woman. Similarly, this woman on the ground, posed by a big, huge shell, reflecting, posing. I think it's very Japanese. Men photographed very much as could be expected. They're just very well cut, clean, and nice clothes. I like the collar that they wore. This man shows more, is emoting sexual intent, I think, looking straight at the camera and looking very cute, wanting. Two more men, friendship, looking straight at the camera, very relaxed. The clothes they're such outstanding clothes. White was the big thing. Or black was the big thing, black suited. The camera was now brought outside and can now take pictures of outdoor things, like this couple on a train. And then the camera outside made people more comfortable, made people more at ease. You can see the girl smiling below, and people had just, they were not stilted. They were no longer lifeless. Like in this picture too, a sense of intimacy among people here. These are incredibly well-looking catechistas, catechism teachers on a Sunday with their parish priest. I guess they just finished a lesson and now they're posed beautifully by a bamboo grove in Norsagaray in Bulacan. A camera can now go to the seaside and take pictures of people by the beach or on a raft. The camera can now go with the picnickers to the waterfalls where they're having a good time. There were many summer vacation group travels to various resorts and the beaches by companies, sponsored by companies. Second to the last photograph, I just want to say how with the demise of studio photography, as we know, of course, there's still some that remain, it really freed people to be much more exuberant, much more gayer, much more happier, sporting bigger smiles, and with teeth. I want you to know that smiling was something that started to happen only 100 years ago, in the 1920s. I remember seeing a picture of my grandmother in 1926 when she sported a big smile. And after seeing so many pictures of her in this very serious, mean look, to smile was like, my God, that's incredible. So the radical aspect of photography outside the studio was that it allowed people to be themselves and to sport such huge smiles, which could not have been captured just doesn't seem to have been captured in a studio. It's always very serious. This is my last photograph. This is about several years after World War II. I love it so much. It is so relaxed. The Manila Hotel is in the background. They're just in the park and they're seated together. They have such big smiles. They're the most relaxed, comfortable people in the world, this couple. And it suggests the new way of looking at themselves and a certain elation, a certain hope for the new republic that they were in. So we've ended with a portrait painting, which inspired studio photography. And used studio photography for various reasons, like commemorating things or remembering things, thinks of an event that may happen. And then, of course, photography was also used to engage people to become studio photographs, were made to make themselves look prettier, to make themselves look more acceptable. It satisfied the vanity of people. I ended with myself, 3 years old. And again, my yaya forced me to pose like this. I would never have posed like this. But what got me interested was most because of the incredible rattan furniture side table that I am posed beside. I would die to have that side table. So that ends my talk on the rise and demise of studio photography. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir John.
Thank
really,
you.
really wonderful photographs. I assume they're part of your collection.
Yes, most of them.
Thank you for a most informative and insightful rundown of your collection. I think the talk struck a chord because we have a whole lot of questions for our question and answer portion. I hope we will be able to finish them. During our last talk last month, we were not able to accommodate, had a lot of comments and insights, but largely because there were a lot of questions also. So start the ball rolling with the questions. I'd like to start the question, Sir John.
Yes, please.
Okay. The first question is from Noel Jordan Raka. My question is why most of the people posing from the photographs collected during the by the Americans and the Europeans were not smiling. I think you already mentioned this. And always in a standard pose. Is there a fad? Was that a fad or was that convention during those periods?
It was purely convention. It was, as I said, portrait paintings in those days were very serious. Nobody smiled in a portrait painting. And so when portrait photography came in, they sort of followed portrait painting and took on that kind of, I always call it a lifeless kind of look. And it was indicative of the ruling class kind of look. The ruling class didn't want to show, they didn't want to show too much emotion. They didn't want to show too much mirth. They were thinking more about making money, I guess, or something like that. But it was never, they were just, so we followed suit that that's the way it should be during the Spanish and the American period. But later on, as I said, things change, especially with the box camera. People could start surreptitiously taking pictures of themselves. They could start showing a smile. They could start showing emotion. They could start doing wacky poses, and on and on and on. And so now we have a situation where the gamut of emotions are evident in photographs.
This convention, I'm curious, just as a follow-through question, sir, was that indicative of the clientele of the studio portraiture? I mean, was studio photography accessible or affordable, for that matter, for the public at large?
Well, they may not have in the beginning, not as affordable as later on, but even then, when it was not affordable, they took on the manners of the ruling class in terms of how they presented themselves. They presented themselves in this very pursed lips and serious mien and totally just lifeless. And so everybody thought that was the way to be. And even when it was affordable, everybody who went to a photo studio had to sort of immediately, there was always a sense of like, well, you got to look a little bit more serious. You can't have this huge, silly smile. That's not the way it's called for in front of a camera. And I now remember, as I think you would remember, I remember my great-grandparents and even my grandparents, but my great-grandparents, they didn't, I don't ever think of them as sporting a smile.
Yes.
It was just, they had very few words, and they were very, the only thing that came out of their lips to me was like, have you gone to church? Did you pray the rosary? It was never like, what's life? Tell me a little bit about your day. No, it was never that. So the sense of seriousness was very grave on people in those days. People didn't lighten up.
Yes, I can understand that. I have only one picture of my grandparents and they were not smiling. Yes. Okay. Questions from our colleagues from Muscat. Were the studios owned by Filipinos or foreigners?
Again, in the first 20 years or 30 years or 40 years of photography, mostly, if not all, by Europeans. By 1902, 1903, I remember in my research, photography studios owned by Filipinos, or certainly a strong suggestion that they were owned by Filipinos, started to appear. Names like Libertad Photo Studio or the name of a Filipino name. But before that, they were mostly European names. They were like Wood and Company, Wood Hijos. There was Albert Hones. There was Van Camp. All of them were Europeans. They just had the money and they had the wherewithal to start the studio. But clearly, 40, 50 years later, the Filipinos followed. And later on, the Japanese followed to own many of our studios.
Okay. As a follow-through question, sir, were the photographers, were they Filipinos or were they trained by the foreigners, the Europeans?
Well, I bet a combination. One is that some of these Filipinos who eventually set up their studios may have been apprentices to the Europeans and then decided they would have their own studios. Then there were also Filipinos who came from somewhat middle to upper middle class background who learned the craft on their own or went to Europe or the United States, came back and set up their own studios. So either through a relationship with the Europeans and the American photography studios, or by their own steam.
Okay. So it's highly unlikely that there are Filipino photographers during the turn of the century, 1899, 1900s.
Yeah, I have not, in my research, have not found photography studios owned by Filipinos around that time. But by 1902 or 1904, but I remember 1911 for sure, there were studios owned and operated by Filipinos.
And as a final question to our follow-through, would there be some record on how much a studio photo would amount to? How much was it to have your picture taken? Or how many pictures would you usually? How many poses were you usually afforded for the amount, for the cost of one setting?
That's a very good question, Raymond. I need to study that. I do know. All I do know is that during the turn of the century and a little bit before, I think to have a picture taken was affordable only by rich people, including rich Filipinos. When the turn of the century and forward, the price of having a photograph taken was a lot cheaper. And in my research, I see working class Filipinos, ordinary Filipinos having their picture taken. And clearly, they could afford it. And it didn't seem like it was too much for their pockets.
Okay. Another question from Noel Jordan Raka. When and how did the oleo photography started in the Philippines? Are you familiar with? I'm not sure. Oleo.
Yeah, it's actually oleo, which is oil, photographs. So it is oil painting on a photograph to color the photograph. I had an example of it in my presentation. It was not one of the very best. And I think later on, though, in the teens and 20s, there are some very beautiful oleo on photograph done, which is color oleo and on a photograph done very well. And so I would say that oleo photograph began. I wouldn't really know what to say. Turn of the century, maybe even a little before that. But I think people knew the existence of oleo photography because once you saw Japanese oleo photography, then you saw the possibility of being able to do the same. It's just that they were far advanced in terms of technical prowess in making oleo photographs.
Okay. Another question, sir, from Crystalline Mangi Ob. Do you think the photographers use the golden rule and rule of thirds on their photos? I'm not sure if that's a technical term. Looking closely on the photos, what are your thoughts on the photographers' perspectives while they were taking these amazing photos?
Well, you can see that when the photographs were taken by foreigners, so that would be the early photographic studios, they focused on things that they thought were exotic or different, or and also to those that they were more familiar with. I mean, to me, what I would say would things like they would apply standards of beauty, meaning what they consider as beautiful, meaning maybe fair looks and a little bit of a nose, and looking mestizos were certainly much more interesting to them than a real dark Filipino. So standards of beauty were applied by the Europeans and the Americans, their own standards of beauty. But later on, as I always feel like in this whole thing of diversification and everything else, I think Americans and European photographers saw the beauty in indigenous peoples and in their own state, and begin to appreciate that. And so they took pictures of that too. I think usually the initial reaction is always going for the exotic, and then later they start to accept it. They start to realize, oh, the exotic is just as beautiful. The normal, whatever it is every day is just as beautiful too.
Okay. Another follow-through question from our friends at Muscat. You said that the Sun Studio was owned by a Japanese.
Yes.
Okay. And how early were the Japanese into coming in with their photography studios?
They came in early, like even in the teens, 1910s and 1920s. There were photography studios, for example, in Baguio, lots of them, not lots, but there were like half a dozen of them already. And then there were also all the way in the south, in Mindanao, in Zamboanga, and in various parts of the country. The reason is not because they had weird ulterior reasons, but it's just that they saw an opportunity, a financial opportunity to set up. They were also highly technical. They knew what a camera was. They knew how to use it. They knew how to set up a studio, and so they were able to set these up in the various places in the country. I need to do much more research on that, because I really believe that the way we looked at ourselves has a lot to do also with the way the Japanese looked at us, because many of the things that eventually wound up in photographs of the 20s and 30s and 40s were still highly influenced by the photographer. And to me, one of the photographers, it seems, were the Japanese, the Japanese owners, like of the Sun, for example.
Okay. We have so many questions, sir. One from Krista Valdez. What do you think about the colorization of these photos? If we want to use photos from your archive for research, how can we acquire or get access? Will you be allowing access to the photos? Are these cataloged as well?
Well, my rule of thumb is, and this is, I speak not only for myself, but also for my Ortigas library, which has a photo bank which can be accessed and can be borrowed and can be used. And we have a sliding scale. A sliding scale in terms of, first we say, yes, you can use it for those we allow. And if you are doing it for personal reasons, then there's a certain fee. It's the smallest fee. If you're doing it for a nonprofit situation or for a book, then the fee is a little bit higher. If you represent a corporation, then we hit you with the highest amount of charges possible, because you may be using it for an advertisement or whatever, but also you can afford it. So it's a sliding fee.
Yes. Okay.
And you can reach us through our Oxfam, our Ortigas Library Foundation website.
Okay. From Marley Basco, what is the name of the first Filipino studio, and where was it located? Who was its photographer or photographers?
And that's hard to answer, because I noticed that when Filipino photography studios started to sprout and develop, they all were doing it about the same time. Like, for example, I remember seeing a photo studio in Cebu opening up around the teens, also in Iloilo in the teens, in Manila. So I don't have the names. And I'm not very much into who was the first, because it's sort of moot. It's a moot situation. It doesn't really amount to much to me who the first was or should be, because all I know is that Filipino photography studios started to appear around the turn of the century in the teens.
Okay. A question from Liberato Ramos. Mr. Silva, I've been looking at 1920 to 1930 photographs recently, and I noted that these were printed as postcards, the back of which had a postcard format. Was that the intent of the photo studio? Or was it the in thing to have pictures made as, you said earlier, mementos or souvenir picture postcards?
Either way, if you went to a studio and you said, I'd like to have a picture myself, and then in the back would look like with an address and a return address, like a postcard, they would do that. If you went to a studio and you said, I just want a picture taken of myself because I'm going to mount it and frame it, then they would do that too. So you do see a lot of photographs of the type that what he is referring to, which we call real photo postcards. Real because they are real. They're really an image, a real image, and then they've been turned into what they look like, just a postcard, back with a postcard backing.
Okay. Another similar question to the one raised earlier. Who was the first Filipino who became a renowned studio photographer? Would you have information on that, sir?
No, I don't.
From Eric Agkawili.
I don't really. I read somebody, I told you this was one of the first studios was in 1911, and I remember the name, or I had forgotten the name. That can be found either in Google or whatever. I frankly don't feel a need to have to know who the first or the first of this, the first of that. It just, all I know is that Filipino photographers did come into fruition, into being, eventually.
Were there any renowned studio photographers? A more preferred photographer than, say, the rest in the street or on the enclave that they all were in? Di ba magkakatabihan, sir?
Well, then you're going into the area of class. There were photographers that were habited or visited by the ruling class, to have the portraits taken.
Yeah.
And so you could say of that group, here's the best one. And then there's one in the middle section, and then there's one in the poorer section. I just read an account of a photography studio run by Chat Paypoch or
Yes.
Paypop or something like that. I know that every Assumptionista had their picture taken there. So
And Atenean.
it's hard to say again who, it depends on the class.
Okay. Yes, sir. A similar question. Alfredo Del Rosario asks, what about the luneta photographers? If your role became prevalent, or
Well, the luneta photographers, I've taken them to be a heroic lot. I remember in my childhood days when I was walking around the luneta and also in Burnham Park, these roving photographers would come. Do you want a picture taken? Ganyan, ganyan. And they'd take a picture of you, and somehow or another you'd wind up getting the picture eventually. They are totally different from photography, studio photography. I have photographs of people posed in the Luneta and in Burnham Park and in various parks throughout the country. Clearly, you could see taken by the roving photographer. No nonsense. Shoot at the couple with the picture of the lake in the background, and that was that. Very clear. No nothing. No pyrotechnics. No more jazzy stuff. Just the pictures. But yes, I consider them heroic people, and I don't know if they still exist, but I would love them to exist. But here comes the cell phone.
yes, okay. In the age of selfie. Okay. Another question from Marian Barro de Guzman. How does the ownership of the colonial photographs work? Their redistribution or their reproduction? How do communities today feel about these images?
Well, first of all, how do the communities feel about them? I was just doing a photographic exhibition of the people of the Cordilleras,
Yes,
of the 19th century Cordillera people, early 20th century, and when I had them exhibited up in Sagada and later in Baguio, I gauged the feelings of the people who were people of those tribes. And first of all, I didn't feel any animosity because one, for them, it was more curiosity and trying to understand it. And I think they were all mature enough to know that it was taken from a point of view. One thing that really I was so touched by a bunch of students who were gawking at the picture of a Nigarot boy, who was of a particular place in Sagada, and they were all looking at it very much. And then one of them said to me, when I look at these pictures, I realize that these people, my ancestors, had never seen these photographs. They were taken, but they were never shown. And now, 100 years later, I am looking at them and appreciating them. So, for the most part, they had this incredible feeling of attachment to their past. And that was nice. And of course, we as curators of that exhibition, we made some very important decisions. One was we would never show pictures of Igorots selling dog, because there were always lots of pictures of being sold, dogs being sold in the Baguio market. We just didn't want to do that. I mean, if you want to see that, you can check in Google if you want, but we're not going to show it. Another picture is a picture of headhunting or headhunters. Again, it's yeah, I think there'll be purists who'll say, well, that was really what was happening in our past, blah blah, blah. Yeah, that's right. And so was dog eating, but we've advanced. I've advanced, and me as a lover of dogs, I would never I would never show anybody. I wouldn't, and I would not collect photographs of Igorots eating dogs
Yes.
and and roasting dogs, even if I had them, which I don't. I don't think so. And so the same thing with any other thing that was inimical to the looks of our people in the past. But then in the past was the past. People headhunt. We don't headhunt anymore. So the community, I think, accepts and is mature enough to know and also to reject whatever the photo images are.
Okay. We have a question of a personal note here from Antoni Cuesta. When you said that in 10 years you found your reading has changed, what are the influences that led you to do so? Were they evidentiary? Did you find additional details or something personal? Or was it influenced by a more contemporary theme? Also, if such a conclusion applies to supposedly historical photos, then where does this put us in the conception of photos as evidence?
Wow, that's a deep question. Thank you. But for me, it was just more of when I saw what I wrote 10 years ago, I said, oh my God, this is so much dribble. This is so much scholarly bullshit. I was still trying to compete. I was trying to feel like I had to make sure that I was the historian of note. Now I'm in retirement mode, and I feel like I know myself. I know my strength, and I know what I've contributed. So a lot of the dross and a lot of that other stuff could be removed, and you have just the basics. And the basics to me is like to gasp at how beautiful a photograph is, rather than going through the deconstruction part of it all. It's no longer necessary to feel like you have to do a lot of verbiage on appreciating a photograph. I think that that's how I feel now. It's really a sense of letting go of ego and just letting the pictures speak, and then letting like for example, that young man with the dangling chinelas. That's all it was. There could be many 100 more reasons why I like that photograph, but it's just this chinelas just dangles, and I find it so, oh my God, it's gonna fall.
Okay. From Jera Lee Golde Amor, the information on what the types of cameras that the Europeans, the Americans, and the Japanese photographers used.
Wow. I think that can be researched elsewhere. As I have not done that kind of research.
Yes,
you
made that clear.
I think all I'm tempted to do right now is just go to Google and say 19th century and early 20th century cameras. And I think you'd be able to get some sense of it. And I don't want to sound demeaning with the question. I just think that it's not something I really got into.
Okay. Sir, a question from Angel Colorful. Wow, that's just really a last name, no? John, could you share with us anything you discovered about Felix Laureño and his photography?
Well, I did not discover, but I actually made some mistakes when I first found out about him about 30 years ago in my research. First of all, I thought that Felix Laureano was a Spaniard because of this book, this reminiscence or remembrance or of the Philippines, dedicated to Juan Luna, I think, or it's been a long time. And it sounded like as if he was a Spaniard living in Barcelona because the book was published in Barcelona, only to find out years later, more intelligent and more diligent scholars found out that he actually was from Panay, and somehow wound up also in Spain, and but also did these photographs, and so there's now the context as to why many of these photographs are of Panay, because he was from there. What did I learn? I learned one, the most incredible photograph by Laureano, which I totally thank him from the bottom of my heart, is that there's one picture of three people washing by the river. And one of them is a man, two of them are women, and the one man looking at the camera looks very effeminate. And Laureano then says he is an agi, an effeminate. This is the first time I see the word agi, meaning like gay, in an 1890 book. And so for me, it was like, bingo, the first photograph of my ancestor, ever in the Philippines. I have much to thank Laureano for that, because he identified him, and I can now say, well, he said so. And it's a wonderful feeling to have that connection thanks to Laureano.
Thank you, sir. I think that's all the questions that were fielded. Do we have any more? Wala na, sir. I would like to pose my own questions to conclude this session before I turn over to Ms. Cora. Sir, why collect photographs? I think a lot of people would like that kind of insights. Why collect photos of people? Some of them you don't really know, and of course they are a thing of beauty. But why collect photographs and to collect photographs, vintage ones at that?
I see that if I had so many years of my life now, I'm now 72, I feel like I extended my life 100 years more, or since the advent of photography, because I have been able to look at the past and look at how people lived and went through their daily lives and how they looked and how they interacted. And it certainly gave me a real sense, almost like as if I've lived through that period. And, it's not fully, but certainly I felt part of that period too. And I thank photography, I thank photographs for extending my life into that past where I feel a lot more competent and confident about knowing how people lived then and why is it that they are what they are, and actually gives me reason why I can now understand the way we are today. Why is it that it is not just when people voted for Mr. Marcos again, you would think, oh my God, it must have been the past 20 years or 30 years. This problem. No. About 100 years ago, I could tell you why it is the psyche and the cultural aspect of Filipinos to know that, that's the way we are. And so I thank being a photo collector and historian to photography, because it has extended my life and my concepts and thinking of my country.
Sir, at the risk of being anticlimactic, I was just informed that there was one last question that that wanted to be addressed. I hope you don't mind. One more question from Nerio Kahilig Luhan. Sorry, sir. do you have any research on the telon artists? I suppose the one who does the backdrop, considering that they are an essential part of studio photography.
Well, the only telon artists that I know of and have been talked about and researched is by my own cousin, Ino Manalo, who is the National Archives Director. He has written, or he had knowledge of the telon artists in Bohol, and in fact collected telons as backdrops, the backdrops for either they were plays or I'm not sure for what use they were, but he would then spout out all these names of people who were telon artists. I know that I'd love to read more on or study more the telon artists in Cebu and in Iloilo, but I have not.
Okay. Yeah. So
that's another 100 more years if I had it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That ends all the questions. Sir, any last comments, parting words, or I don't know if you're ready for that.
No, well, my parting word is more that I want to thank everyone for attending my talk. Nerio, the last questioner, is somebody I admire with his book on the history of Iloilo. I think that's such incredible, formidable work. So I am with colleagues and people who are very serious about this, but who are also maybe unserious and just enjoy it. I thank them all for being for attending, and I'm happy to share. That's one thing. I'm happy to share whatever I have with people. If they just write me a letter through our Ortigas Foundation website, and see if I can be of help. I want to share more and more than ever, because I don't want to take this to my grave. I think it's really meant to be for public usage, for the greater interest of everybody.
Thank you, Sir John. Thank you for answering the questions. I would now like to turn over the virtual floor to Ms. Cora for her concluding remarks. Ms. Cora?
Yes, can you hear me? As usual,
yes.
That's a frequent question from me. Thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you very much, John, for this extraordinary presentation and your stand about collecting and sharing. I especially love the photographs of John Silva as an assertive 2-year-old. You're still assertive. And thank you too for sharing a part of your collection with us and your new views on photographs. Maybe I can pick from the photos that you showed. I too like the two ladies with striped saya. Quite modern indeed. Eye contact. And I don't know if anybody in the audience noticed, she's wearing a watch. And the mestiza lady, and the very different manner with which she donned her tapis. Early fashionista. It is our hope that we can ask you, John, to talk about photographs of our Katutubò naman, and that Ortigas and Muscat can work together on cultural and publication projects and programs. And maybe I should ask your cousin Ino Manalo to talk about the telon artists. So maraming salamat. To our participants, followers, friends, we hope to see you next month. From photography, we move to Islamic art with Dr. Abraham Sakili. Meanwhile, do continue to be our partners in safeguarding and celebrating Philippine culture. It is important, it is our responsibility, and it is fun. For announcements, we are on Facebook and Instagram. We are also on YouTube and Spotify. Do like us. Maraming salamat at magandang gabi or hapon sa kanilang lahat. Hanggang sa susunod na buwan at kabanata ng aming lecture series 2022. Ingat po sila.